What if the smallest act of kindness you choose today becomes the reason someone else finds the strength to keep living tomorrow? And what if a simple, daily moment, something most people would ignore without even noticing, quietly holds the power to change two lives at the same time? Because the story you are about to hear is not loud, not dramatic, and not filled with miracles. Yet it carries a kind of truth that stays in the heart long after the video ends. So if you believe kindness still matters in a world that often feels too busy to care, stay with this story until the end. Every morning in a quiet neighborhood where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen, an old man sat alone on a worn wooden bench near a small bus stop, holding a paper cup of tea that often grew cold before he finished it. His clothes were always clean but clearly old, his hands slightly shaking, his eyes calm yet carrying a loneliness that words could never fully explain. And people passed by him every day without looking twice, rushing toward jobs, phones, and responsibilities that felt more urgent than a silent stranger sitting still. Days turned into weeks, and weeks quietly blended into months. And for most of the world, nothing changed, except for one young woman who began noticing him on her way to work each morning. Her name was Maya, and she wasn't someone who thought of herself as a hero or a saint. She was just a regular person trying to keep up with life, rent bills, traffic, and the constant pressure of being fine, even on days she didn't feel fine at all. She worked at a small medical supply office downtown, the kind of job that kept her busy but didn't make her feel proud. And lately she had been waking up with a heavy feeling she couldn't explain, like her days were repeating without meaning, like her life was moving but her heart was standing still. At first, the old man was just a part of the background, one more detail in the city, but something about his stillness made her slow down inside, even while her feet kept moving forward. She told herself it was nothing, just another stranger in a big place. Yet the next morning she looked again, and the morning after that she noticed he was always there at the same time, sitting the same way, holding the same quiet silence around him. And without planning to, she began wondering simple questions she had never asked before, like whether he had family, whether someone was waiting for him somewhere, or whether anyone had spoken to him that day. One cold morning, when the wind felt sharper than usual and most people walked faster to escape it, she saw his hands trembling more than before, and without thinking too much, she stopped at a small nearby cafe, bought an extra cup of hot tea, and walked toward him with a nervous heartbeat she did not fully understand. Because sometimes the hardest part of kindness is not the action itself, but the moment right before it, when fear of awkwardness tries to hold you back. She gently offered the tea with a small, unsure smile, expecting nothing in return. And for a second he looked surprised, as if kindness had become something unfamiliar, something he no longer expected from ordinary mornings. But then his eyes softened, and he accepted the cup with both hands as though it were far more valuable than tea. And in a quiet voice he simply said, "Thank you," to small words that carried a depth of gratitude most people rarely hear anymore. That moment lasted less than a minute, yet something invisible shifted inside both of them, and she walked away feeling strangely lighter, while he sat there holding warmth not only in his hands but somewhere deeper in his chest. The next morning she brought tea again, this time without hesitation, and he greeted her with a gentle nod that felt almost like the beginning of a friendship, even though they still knew nothing about each other. And this simple routine continued day after day, small, quiet, and easy to miss for anyone who was not paying attention. Sometimes she would only stay 30 seconds, sometimes 3 minutes, but she always made sure to look him in the eyes and treat him like a real person, not like a problem, not like a charity project, just a human being. If you're listening and you like stories that hit the heart, take a second to like this video and subscribe to English, because it helps these kinds of meaningful stories reach more people who might need them. As days passed, their short conversations slowly grew longer, like sunlight stretching across a room in the morning, never rushing, never forcing, just gently appearing. She learned his name was Frank. He spoke with a calm voice that sounded tired but steady, the voice of someone who had lived through storms and learned how to stay quiet about it. He told her he used to fix clocks, not the fancy kind you see in museums, but the old ones people kept in their houses, the ones that ticked like a heartbeat in the background. He said he liked clocks because they didn't lie, they kept moving forward whether you were ready or not, and when something broke, you didn't scream at it, you opened it carefully, found the problem, and repaired it with patience. Maya smiled at that, because it sounded like advice without him trying to sound wise. One morning she asked, gently, "Why do you come here every day?" And he paused as if he was deciding whether the truth would be too heavy. Then he said, "I'm waiting." She didn't push. She just nodded, because sometimes respect is knowing when not to pull on someone's pain. Over the next weeks, pieces of his life appeared like small puzzle parts. Not all at once, but little by little. He mentioned a wife who loved jazz music and always hummed while cooking. Then he stopped speaking for a second and stared at the street like he could see her there. Then he swallowed and continued as if nothing happened. He mentioned a son, then quickly changed the subject. He mentioned that his home was not far, but his eyes said it was far in a different way. Maya didn't need to be told everything to understand the main thing. This man had been carrying loneliness for a long time, and the city had gotten used to his silence. What Maya didn't say out loud was that she understood loneliness too, just in a different shape. She had moved to this city after her father passed away, trying to escape the house that felt too quiet afterward. And her mother had remarried quickly, not because she stopped loving Maya's dad, but because some people are terrified of silence. Maya didn't hate her for it, but it made Maya feel like grief was something everyone wanted to hide. And since then she'd learned to keep her feelings neat and small, like a folded paper you never open. So when she saw Frank every day, she didn't just see an old man on a bench. She saw a human being stuck in a kind of quiet. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she wanted to make that quiet softer. The routine grew. Tea became tea and a small sandwich. Sandwich became a warm muffin on colder days. Some days she brought him a newspaper, and he would point at an article and make a dry joke that made her laugh unexpectedly. Other days he just wanted silence, and she learned that kindness isn't always talking. Sometimes it's simply sitting near someone long enough that they don't feel abandoned. People around them started noticing. A woman from the corner shop began nodding at Frank. A bus driver started greeting him. A teenager who always wore headphones began saying morning like it cost nothing. Because once one person breaks the ice of indifference, the whole world starts remembering how to be human again. Then one morning, Maya arrived with her usual coffee and tea, and the bench was empty. At first she told herself he was probably late. Maybe the bus came early and he moved. Maybe he was just using the restroom. But the longer she stood there, the colder her chest felt. She checked her phone, pretending she wasn't worried. But she was. She waited. 5 minutes. 10. The teacup in her hand started to cool, and she realized she didn't even know where he lived. She didn't know his last name. She didn't know if he had anyone to call, and for the first time she understood the scary part of caring. When you care, you can't just walk away without feeling it. That day she asked the cafe owner if he had seen Frank, and the owner frowned and said, "Not today." She asked the bus driver who sometimes stopped there, and he shook his head. That night, Maya went home, but couldn't relax, because her mind kept replaying Frank's calm voice saying, "I'm waiting." And she suddenly hated that word, because waiting can be hopeful, but it can also be painful. And she didn't know which one it was for him. The next morning, she came earlier, heart beating like she was about to take an exam, and again, empty. She felt a rush of panic that surprised her, because she hadn't realized how much this simple daily friendship mattered. Until the moment it disappeared. She walked into the cafe and asked more directly this time, "Does anyone know him?" "The older man who sits on the bench." The owner sighed and said, "I heard he got taken to the clinic last night. He looked dizzy." Someone called it in. Maya didn't even finish her coffee. She thanked him and left. The clinic wasn't far, a small building with a plain sign. And as she walked in, the smell of disinfectant hit her, and suddenly she felt nervous, because she didn't know if she had a right to be there. She wasn't family. She wasn't a close friend on paper. She was just a girl with tea. But then she remembered his hands shaking around that cup, and she walked to the front desk and said, "Hi, I'm looking for an older man named Frank. He comes to the bus stop bench every morning." The receptionist looked at her for a second, then softened and said, "Room 12. Maya's throat tightened. She walked slowly down the hallway, the kind of slow that comes from fear. And when she opened the door, Frank was lying in bed with a thin blanket, looking smaller than he did on the bench, like illness had taken a piece of his strength overnight. His eyes turned toward her, and the relief on his face was quiet but real. "You found me," he said. Maya exhaled like she had been holding her breath for 2 days. "Of course," she replied, trying to sound normal. "You can't just disappear on me." He gave a faint smile. "Didn't mean to scare you." She sat beside him, and for a moment, neither spoke, because their friendship had grown past small talk into something deeper, something that didn't always need words. Finally, she asked, "Are you okay?" He hesitated, then said, "I'm tired." The way he said it wasn't just physical. It sounded like a life sentence. Maya leaned forward and said, "Then we'll take it one day at a time. But you're not doing it alone." Frank stared at her as if he was trying to understand why a stranger would care this much, and then his eyes got glossy and he looked away, embarrassed by emotion. "You're a good kid," he whispered. Maya shook her head gently. "I'm not a kid, and you're not a burden." He closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them again, he looked like someone who had been holding back a story for too long. "Maya," he said softly, like he was testing her name to make sure it was real. "There's something I never told you." She didn't rush him. She just waited, and he finally said, "I don't come to that bench for the bus. I come because that's where my son promised he'd meet me." Frank's words hung in the air like a clock that stopped ticking for one painful second, and Maya felt her chest tighten because suddenly the bench wasn't just a bench, it was a memory, a promise, and maybe even a wound that never healed. Maya kept her voice gentle. "When did he promise?" Frank stared at the ceiling, like the answer was written up there. "Years ago," he said. "The day he left." He swallowed, then continued slowly, as if each word had weight. "We had a fight. A stupid one, but it felt big at the time. He was young, angry, full of pride. I was stubborn. I said things I shouldn't have said." His hands moved slightly, like he wanted to fix the moment the way he fixed clocks, but time doesn't open up that easily. He walked out. Then later that week, he called. He said he was sorry. He said he wanted to talk. He said, "Dad, meet me at the bus stop bench on Tuesday morning. Same place you used to pick me up from school." Frank's voice cracked a little. I showed up. Tuesday came. I waited. Maya's eyes stayed on him. "Did he come?" Frank shook his head. "No." He inhaled, slow and shaky. "At first I thought he got busy. Then I thought he forgot. Then days became weeks. Weeks became months." He let out a small laugh that had no happiness in it. "You ever notice how the mind makes excuses to protect the heart? I told myself he'd come next Tuesday, then next month, then next year." Maya felt tears rising but held them back. "What happened to him?" Frank looked away. "I don't know," he said quietly. "That's the part that hurts the most. No goodbye. No closure. Just silence." Maya wanted to say something comforting, but real comfort doesn't come from fake promises. So she said the truest thing she could. "That's not your fault." Frank didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Maybe it isn't. But every day I sit there, it feels like I'm paying for my part anyway." Maya reached toward his hand. Not dramatic, just human, and held it gently. "Frank," she said, "waiting doesn't have to be punishment." He looked at her, eyes tired. "Then what is it?" Maya took a breath. "Maybe it's hope," she said. "And even if it doesn't end the way you want, hope is still better than dying inside." Frank stared at her for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly, like her words were a warm blanket he didn't know he needed. Over the next few days, Maya visited him after work. She brought him fruit, a warm sweater, and more than anything, her presence. Nurses began recognizing her. One nurse even said quietly, "You're the only visitor he's had." That sentence hit Maya hard, because it reminded her how easily people disappear when you're old, how society treats loneliness like it's normal, like it's something you're supposed to accept. And Maya hated that. When Frank was released, he didn't want to go back to his tiny apartment alone. He didn't say it directly, but Maya could see it. So she made a decision, not to move him into her home, not to do something extreme, but to create a safer routine. She found a local community center that offered senior check-ins and meal programs. She arranged a weekly appointment with a doctor. She helped him set up a simple phone with big buttons. When she handed it to him, he stared at it like it was a strange new world. "I'm too old to learn this," he said. Maya smiled. "You fixed clocks," she replied. "You can learn a phone." Frank chuckled. "Clocks don't ring at midnight. Then don't answer at midnight. Maya joked. And for the first time in a while, Frank laughed like a real laugh, not forced. The bench routine returned, but it changed. Now it wasn't only about waiting, it was about living. They still met most mornings, but sometimes they walked a little, slowly, around the block. Sometimes they sat at the cafe, instead of the cold bench. Maya started bringing a small notebook, because Frank would tell her stories from his life, and she didn't want them to disappear. He told her about the first clock he ever repaired, how he stayed up all night, hands shaking, heart racing, because he was terrified of breaking it. He told her about meeting his wife at a dance where he stepped on her foot and thought he ruined everything. But she laughed and said, "At least you're trying." And that line became the story of his whole marriage. He told her about his son as a child, small hands, reaching for his, asking 1,000 questions about everything, and how Frank used to lift him up to look inside the clock shop window, displays promising. "One day I'll teach you all of it." Maya listened like these memories mattered, because they did. And something unexpected happened. Maya started healing to dot her own life felt less empty. Her days felt like they had a reason. She found herself being kinder, not just to Frank, but to the world. She smiled at strangers. She helped an exhausted coworker. She called her mother more often, instead of avoiding it. It was as if kindness didn't just help the receiver, it rewired the giver. Then one morning, while they sat at the cafe near the window, a young man walked in to buy coffee. Maya noticed him because he paused the moment he saw Frank, like his body recognized something before his mind did. The young man stood still, staring, confusion on his face. And Frank didn't notice at first, because he was stirring sugar slowly. Maya's heart started beating faster for no logical reason, like a warning bell. The young man took a step closer, eyes fixed on Frank. "Excuse me," he said, voice tight. "What's your name?" Frank looked up slowly. "Frank," he replied. "Frank Miller." The young man's face changed instantly, like years of distance collapsed into 1 second. His eyes filled with shock and something that looked like pain. "Dad," he whispered. The spoon fell from Frank's hand and made a small sound against the cup. But the sound felt huge in that moment. Frank stared at him, mouth slightly open, like his brain refused to believe what his eyes were seeing. "No," Frank said quietly, almost pleading. "No. That's not." The young man swallowed hard. "It's me," he said. "It's Ethan." Frank's hands began to shake. His eyes, usually calm, became stormy. "Ethan," he repeated, like saying it might make him disappear. The young man nodded, tears forming fast. "I've been looking for you," Ethan said. "I didn't know where you were. I didn't even know if you were." His voice broke. "Alive." Frank stood up slowly as if his legs might fail him. "Where have you been?" Frank asked. And the question wasn't angry, it was wounded. Ethan's eyes dropped. "I messed up," he said. "I left that day, and I was supposed to meet you at the bench. I was on my way." He took a deep breath, and Maya watched the struggle in his face, like he was fighting a memory that still hurt. "I got into an accident," Ethan said. "Not that morning, but the night before. A drunk driver hit my car. I woke up in the hospital days later with my phone smashed, my wallet gone, and my memory messed up. Mess it up? I remembered parts of my life, but it was like pages were missing." Frank's face twisted with pain. "All these years," he whispered. Ethan nodded, crying now. "When I finally recovered enough, I tried to find you, but I didn't have your number. And I was ashamed, too. I thought you wouldn't want me after I disappeared. I moved. I struggled. I kept telling myself I'd come back when I had my life together." He shook his head. But time kept moving. And then, last week I was driving through this neighborhood for work, and I saw the bench. He looked at Frank with desperation. I don't know why, but I stopped. Something in me said, check. And today I walked into this cafe and saw you, and it felt like my heart got punched. Frank's eyes spilled tears silently. He stepped closer, very slowly, like he was approaching a fragile clock he didn't want to break. "You were alive," Frank whispered. "All this time, you were alive." Ethan nodded, choking. "And you were waiting," he said. Frank's face crumpled. Every day, Frank admitted. Every day. Maya sat frozen, tears sliding down her face, because she realized she had been part of something larger than she knew. She thought she was simply helping an old man survive lonely mornings, but she had unknowingly kept a promise alive long enough for the promised person to return. Ethan looked at Maya then, confused but grateful. "Who are you?" he asked softly. Maya wiped her tears. "I'm just someone who brings him tea," she said. Ethan's eyes filled with respect. "You kept him alive," he said. Maya shook her head. "No," she replied. "He kept himself alive. I just reminded him he wasn't invisible." Frank finally did what he hadn't done in years. He opened his arms. Ethan stepped into them, and the hug was not clean or perfect. It was messy and shaken and full of everything they never got to say. And in that cafe window, people stopped and watched quietly, because even strangers can feel when something sacred is happening. The hug lasted long enough that time seemed to soften around it, like the world itself was giving them space. And when they finally pulled apart, Frank kept one hand on Ethan's shoulder as if he was afraid his son might vanish again. Ethan sat down across from him, still crying, still breathing like he had been running for years, and finally stopped. Frank wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed, and then laughed a small, broken laugh. "You look older," he said. Ethan nodded. "So do you," he replied, and that simple exchange carried love, pain, and relief all at once. Maya stayed quiet, because she understood this moment belonged to them. But Frank reached for her hand gently and squeezed it. "Don't go," he said. "You're part of this?" Maya's throat tightened. She nodded and stayed. Ethan took a deep breath. "Dad," he said, "I don't expect you to forgive me fast. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I'm here now. I want to make it right." Frank stared at him, eyes tired but warm. "I didn't wait all these years to punish you," Frank said. "I waited because I loved you." Ethan broke again, putting his face in his hands. "I was so ashamed," he whispered. "After the accident, after the missing time, I felt like a stranger in my own life. And then I started thinking, if I show up, what if he's angry? What if he moved on? What if he doesn't want me?" Frank leaned forward. "There is no moving on from your child," he said. "There is only learning to breathe through the pain." Maya felt those words sink into her bones, because they weren't just about Ethan. They were about every relationship in the world, how pride and fear can delay love until time almost steals the chance. Over the next hours, they talked. Not all at once, not like a movie where everything gets solved in one scene, but honestly, slowly, with pauses, with tears, with small laughs that surprised them. Ethan explained how, after the accident, he moved to another state for rehab and work, how he tried to rebuild a life from scratch, how he searched for Frank online but didn't find much, and how he convinced himself Frank must have moved or didn't want to be found. Frank admitted he never stopped hoping, but he also admitted he sometimes hated himself for the fight, sometimes blamed himself for pushing too hard, sometimes wondered if he deserved loneliness as punishment. Ethan shook his head. "You didn't deserve that," he said. "You deserved a phone call. You deserved a hug. You deserved me showing up." Frank's voice turned soft. "Then show up now," he said. Ethan nodded. "I will." The days that followed were not magically perfect, but they were real. Ethan started visiting Frank every day after work. Sometimes they went for slow walks. Sometimes they sat at the bench, not because they needed to wait anymore, but because it had become a symbol of how love can survive time. Ethan brought old photos he had saved. Frank pulled out a small box of memories from his apartment, and they looked through them like two people, discovering the same life from different angles. Maya stayed involved too, but she learned how to step back when needed, and step in when helpful. Ethan insisted on thanking her properly. One morning, he showed up with flowers and a small bag from the cafe. "I don't know how to repay you," he told her. Maya shook her head. "You don't repay kindness," she said. "You pass it on." Ethan stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Then I will," he promised. And he did. He started greeting the old man who sold newspapers near the corner. He started tipping the tired barista who always looked stressed. He started volunteering on weekends at the community center. Not for attention, but because he finally understood what Maya already knew. Kindness is not a big dramatic act. It's a daily decision, and daily decisions shape the kind of person you become. But life, as always, had one more test. One evening, Frank got sick again, worse than before. Maya got the call first because Frank had listed her number at the clinic. She rushed there, heart pounding, and Ethan arrived minutes later, breathless, eyes full of fear. Frank lay in bed with oxygen, eyes half open, looking exhausted. Ethan grabbed his hand. "Dad," he whispered, "I'm here." Frank's eyes slowly focused on him, and a faint smile appeared. "You came," Frank whispered. Ethan's voice shook. "I'm not leaving," he said. Frank's fingers squeezed it slightly, weak but clear. Maya stood on the other side of the bed, tears falling silently, because she knew this was the moment Frank feared for years. The ending. But this time it was different. This time he wasn't alone. A doctor later explained Frank's condition gently, saying his heart was fragile, that they could stabilize him for now. But time was limited. Ethan looked like he had been punched, and Maya felt her own chest ache. But she also saw something beautiful. Even though time was limited, love was present, and that changes everything. Over the next weeks, Ethan moved his schedule around to be with Frank as much as possible. Maya kametu, bringing soup, warm blankets, little things that made the room feel less like a hospital and more like a place where a human life mattered. Frank had good days and bad days. On good days, he told stories. On bad days, he slept and held Ethan's hand even in unconsciousness, as if touch alone could keep him anchored. One afternoon, when sunlight poured through the window, Frank asked Ethan and Maya to come closer. His voice was thin but steady. "I need to say something while I can," he whispered. Ethan leaned in. "Anything," he said. Frank looked at Maya first. "You gave me mornings," he said. "You gave me dignity. You made me feel seen." Maya tried to speak, but her throat closed. Frank then looked at Ethan. "And you," he said. "You gave me the ending I prayed for." Ethan's tears fell onto the blanket. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered. Frank shook his head slightly. "Don't spend the rest of your life living in apology," Frank said. "Spend it living in love. That's how you honor me." Ethan nodded hard. "I will," he promised. Frank's eyes drifted toward the window. "You know," he whispered, "clocks don't stop because they're angry. They stop because something inside needs care." He looked back at them. "Take care of what's inside you. Don't wait too long." Those were some of his last clear words. A few days later, early in the morning, Frank passed quietly, with Ethan holding one hand and Maya holding the other. No dramatic music, no loud goodbye, just a soft release, like a tired heart finally resting. Ethan cried like a child, not because he was weak, but because love makes you honest. Maya cried too, because even though she knew Frank for a smaller piece of his life, that piece mattered deeply. At Frank's small memorial, Ethan spoke about the bench, about the promise, about the years lost, and then he looked at Maya in front of everyone and said, "This woman saved my father from disappearing. She gave him mornings when the world gave him silence." People listened differently after that. Neighbors who had ignored Frank before now felt something shift inside them. After the memorial, Ethan and Maya walked to the bus stop bench together. The bench was still there. Same scratches, same tired wood, same street sounds. Ethan set down 2 cups of tea and sat. Maya sat beside him. They didn't talk much at first. Then Ethan said softly, "He really waited." He really loved, she replied. Ethan stared at the street, where people rushed past. "I want to do something," he said. "Something that makes this mean more." Maya looked at him. "Like what?" Ethan took a breath. "I want to start a small kindness program at the community center," he said. "Not big. Just daily check-ins, rides to appointments, a warm drink, a conversation. The stuff that seems small until it's all someone has." Maya smiled through tears. "That's him," she said. "That's your dad." Months later, that neighborhood changed in small, visible ways. A sign appeared at the community center. "Morning bench meetup. Everyone, welcome." Seniors came. Busy workers stopped for a minute. Teenagers who used to ignore older people began saying hello. Not because the world became perfect, but because one person had shown what it looks like to care daily. Maya kept visiting the bench too, not to wait for someone who wasn't coming, but to remind herself that love is something you practice, not something you postpone. And maybe that's why you're hearing this story right now, because somewhere in your life, there's a bench moment, a person you've been meaning to check on, a kindness you've been thinking about doing, a message you've been delaying. And this story is your reminder that waiting too long can cost you chances you never get back. If this story touched your heart even a little, please share it with someone who needs hope today. And drop a comment telling me about the smallest act of kindness you've ever given or received, because your comment might inspire another person to care. And that's how kindness spreads. And don't forget to share this video so more people can find stories like this on English, because sometimes one story is all it takes to change how someone treats the world tomorrow.